Can you see me? Okay.
Yep. See you. It's good to see you. How you doing?
All right. Finally meeting for the first time face to face.
Yeah, face to face. That's very cool. This is. I gotta be honest. This is a great honor. I didn't expect that we would be actually doing this, especially since when I first saw your video, and I was just like, at a perfect time. I was like, wow. So this is a really cool thing to be talking with you.
I have Linda right here next to me.
Hi, Linda. Nice to meet you.
You too.
But not
I agree. The Temple University videos are amazing.
Sorry, I'm being blinded by the light here, so my eyes are like saucers. You'll know why.
That's okay. Yeah, I've got a blinding light myself. Yeah. And it's very warm over here. I'm in Southern California, and the humidity is quite intense today.
Oh, okay. I like the background you have there. That's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, the Zoom's got this function to do. I got a green screen behind me, so I got the.
Okay.
I can implement the background. Yeah.
Okay. We just have the office as our green screen. So.
That's totally fine. Yeah. I'm in charge of moderating my Uncle Bruce's webinars once a month. So.
Oh, nice.
That's
cool.
how I have this Zoom account. But it's been pretty cool. You know, Uncle Bruce was definitely involved in a huge part of my synchronicities over time, and the fact that I didn't even follow you on Twitter, so it was just like an amazing synchronicity that you had posted something about him on there. And I was thinking when I typed to you on Facebook, just randomly, like, oh, let me mention about Uncle Bruce, and so obviously there was a reason for that.
Yes.
That's really cool. So yeah. This is really exciting to be talking with you. I mean, there's so many. I've actually got a copy of your syllabus right here that I was looking at.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I mean, that does get updated from time to time. That's the next project after I get the new book published, just to update the syllabus. So
Nice.
But it's what you have there is pretty accurate anyway. So.
Yeah. One of the things I'm sure we can kind of jump around. I have like a few questions in line, but I figure we could just kind of have a conversation about some stuff if that's cool with you.
Yeah, sure. That's okay.
One of the things that I really like about in your presentations and everything is just when you describe the Invisible College. One of my questions was like about the Invisible College. Is there like a academic actual organization, do you think, of the Invisible College, or is this something that's more just permeates through our subconscious and just in the field of consciousness, or is there some sort of actual agenda in place?
I think that there is a definite agenda in the good sense in place with that, and it's something that kicked off in the 1970s when you had that whole thing with it was like I'm trying to think, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and several others, Francis Ford Coppola, all right, and these movie directors were doing their own research before they went into these movies, because they were looking back at ancient history. And then they were starting to get information handed off to them by the military UFO community on the back end. And what they were being handed off was matching up with what they were researching in ancient history. So this is how you have this explosion in the 1970s, where all of a sudden, as George Lucas would call it, they became the master storytellers, just like ages ago in ancient history. All right. All they were doing was, like, if you read the book by Joseph Campbell, Hero of a Thousand Faces, he obviously incorporates Luke Skywalker into that book with all the ancient renditions of Luke Skywalker that came before. And then of course, once you realize that this is where the foundation was for all of a sudden movies becoming a teaching tool instead of this menacing propaganda of the 40s and 50s, okay? Earth versus the flying saucers. Yeah, like that was ever going to happen, okay? So, I mean, there's no versing anything, you know? They'll do whatever they please because they have that kind of power, whether it's good or bad. But that viewpoint was picked up on, you know, and you see how George Lucas decides to focus on the past. Steven Spielberg decides to focus on how the past affects the present. And then you have others like Ridley Scott, who said, well, okay, let's propel this into the future and see what happens then. So it was past, present, and future of the Invisible College there on what was going on. So, but yeah, there was a definite starting point there. I think it's evident in the fact that in Close Encounters, you have the cameo of J. Allen Hynek at the end. So, who was the only one to basically go up against Carl Sagan and put him in his place at the time. When Carl Sagan decided to turn towards the dark side and go against everything he had said in the 60s and 70s. So, but yeah, it was an important tool. And then that evolved into the 80s and 90s, you know, further along there. But once you see that foundation, one of the most fundamental examples would be, and this is one of Linda's and mine's favorites, as Star Trek Deep Space Nine. As far as the Invisible College goes, hands down, nothing beats that, okay? Even though it started in the 70s, the point is the Invisible College really got its legs when Star Trek Deep Space Nine came along. And that is the reason why that one series basically split the Star Trek fan base right down the middle. There were those who absolutely loved it and those who absolutely hated it, okay? I absolutely loved it. Linda loved it. I mean, we've watched the whole 7 seasons from beginning to end. And so just the story arc there fits right in with ancient history, the Masonic agenda, the Moorish legacy, extraterrestrial contact, alien abduction phenomena. It all goes right in sequence with the symbolism they used in that series all along. And that's why that one stands apart. Even though it's part of the Star Trek universe in a big way, it also stands apart as being very different from Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager, or anything else. You know, and of course, you know, it's everything from the most visceral example of a black captain to the more symbolic examples of the shapeshifters who were the enemy on the other side of the wormhole. So,
I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I've actually got my crew hat from
yes, very cool.
Into Darkness. I was living when I was in Los Angeles. I was living with a friend who was working directly with J.J. Abrams when they were making that movie. So, I mean, I love Star Trek. So I'm totally on board with you.
I think it's very cool the way they kicked off the franchise as an alternate universe with Spock as like the common ground between the two. I thought that was great.
Yeah, and it kind of flipped things on its head a little bit. I mean, I thought it spoke very much about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict between like the Romulans and the Vulcans.
Yeah,
Flipped it around. So instead of like Romulus being the enemy, it's like they blew up planet Vulcan. And
yeah.
That's an important narrative. I thought that was like the White Hats kind of trying to tell a different version of that story.
Quite shocking when they went that far and destroyed Spock's planet. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. Yeah.
But see, you're open to it. If you're not open to it, you don't see that. You see it just as a TV series. There's hidden messages there if you're open to seeing them.
I'm 100% with this process. I have a YouTube channel that I work on with a friend of mine who, out of a small group of friends, that we can actually talk on this level and have kind of communication. But my close friend Mike and I started this YouTube channel called the Synchrocosm.
So, okay, cool.
Because we're video editors, and in the process of trying to make a new reel instead of just putting like clips of things we've edited, we thought it'd be interesting to just demonstrate our editing abilities by doing movie mashups. So
yes.
Started, but I went off on the direction because back in 2012 I started to see that all of these movies about aliens are telling the exact same story. So the first video I made is called the 2012 The Ultimate Movie Conspiracy. I cut together clips from all of the movies, and it tells the narrative. I mean, it's the whole Enki and Enlill story. I mean, it's the entire Gnostic tradition.
Oh yeah,
yes. It's all in there. So at some point I'll send you a link to the channel.
Oh yeah, we'd love to watch it. Definitely, yes.
Yeah. And I feel I'd be interested. I'm curious what you're thinking about James Cameron too, because James Cameron, in my opinion, has obviously been involved in this Invisible College for quite some time. But it seems that he's been on a journey of like the movies he was making in the beginning compared to the movies he's making now are almost like he's had a pole shift. Where in the beginning it was like the New World Order, the Terminators, they're coming to kill you, and then going into this transition with The Abyss. Which is one of my favorite movies that he made, where it's like, well, maybe it's not the aliens who are the bad guys. Maybe we're actually doing something here. And then total pole shift to Avatar, where it's literally the aliens are the good guys compared to like aliens.
Which, Avatar was pretty much a solid rendition of the European invasion against Native Americans. So hands down, there was no doubt about where he was going with that story. So,
I heard that. I mean, I'm sure he's a Mason. I'm sure I heard a story. I don't know how true it is, but that he was dependent upon a certain group of Masons to fund his movies in the beginning. But then he got so famous and so much wealthy that he decided to stop like doing what they wanted to do, and he probably got higher up in the Masonic Order and everything. So, making a movie like True Lies, which has so much like telling story about the intelligence community and all the bullshit that's involved with that. and then the big changeover, like people shift there. Like a lot of people loved James Cameron up until Titanic, and then it split. And then I was like, people were like, Titanic was bullshit. But it's like in the beginning, a lot of his movies were about the light and the dark narrative.
Yeah.
And Titanic was a love story. And so is Avatar. Avatar is like as well.
I think the reason he also picked the Titanic story and did such an epic view on it historically is that the Titanic has always been the perfect symbol of the upper class and the lower class.
Yes.
Okay, and you see that in the movie. The main character is coming from the lower class, and the enemy is the upper class, the rich, the elite. Okay, and the one that's caught in the middle is the woman. Okay, which side is she going to come down on? The one she loves in the lower class, or her loyalties to money in the upper class? So, and that's known through history. It's like all the elitists got on the top level, and everyone who was seen as low-class garbage was put down below, and that's why all those people died first. And but you know, the ultimate lesson was that love does conquer all, because the rich didn't get away with anything, because they all ended up committing suicide after the stock market crash. So, so they thought they got away from the Titanic, but they still ended up killing themselves. So
Titanic being a mass, like the symbol for that. Collapsible, unsustainable paradigm. The hubris of thinking like we're the best, and the fact that it's called the Titanic. And
and you want to take it one step further. They built the boats the right way as long as it never hit icy water. But once it hit icy water, Mother Nature was supreme and was able to weaken the metal to cut right through it with an iceberg. Under normal circumstances, no iceberg would have penetrated that hull. So here you have, you know, Mother Nature basically laughing her ass off, saying, "Ha ha, I'm going to take you out anyway."
And I'm curious also what you think about this too, because there's the idea. Well, it's not even an idea. The fact that some of the wealthiest people in America were aboard the Titanic, like John Jacob Astor and Goose. And these guys were opposed to the development of the Federal Reserve, which was like in the works. They wanted to build this like world kind of like bank economy to fund a whole series of wars, like the 30-year wars, right? That were happening after that. And they were the only ones that were opposing it. And J.P. Morgan was supposed to be on the Titanic, who's obviously entrenched with the Rothschilds. Right before the Titanic is about to set sail, J.P. Morgan's, my wife had a terrible nightmare. I think we're not going to get on the Titanic today.
And you'd be amazed how the rich and the upper management and the Billionaire Boys Club, they will pay attention to that more than you realize, because they're, in the darker sense, they're part of that inside occult Masonic info So they're aware of the fact that if they're getting a psychic message from their wife, they should pay attention to it, you know? It's one of those rare moments where you wish Abraham Lincoln had listened to his wife and didn't go to the theater that night. So
That's right, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So so with that in mind, the Masonic Order, I'm curious more about your take on this and the origins of the Masonic Order, because I recently watched this documentary about the Jesuit order and their whole infiltration of a lot of, like, the Illuminati was founded by one of the Jesuit professors, and I totally am, like, one of the things in your Moorish Legacy presentation of just like, you're going to be, after we're done here, you're going to be going back to Egypt and Islam to understand a lot of this stuff. Like, Egyptian Christianity is a whole like, people aren't even aware of, like, all the connections with that. So,
yeah,
you know, there's a lot of these things get so like interwoven and disguised, and people will say all Freemasons are evil or all this or that. But like, what is your like origin story to the Freemasons? How does that fit into all this? Like, where can we get some clarity on that?
and well, first of all, that's a loaded question to ask, and
sorry.
it has a good answer. So,
Yeah, I know.
But just to put it out there, there are people who are just part of your average coffee clutch lodge, okay? Lower level, they're just there for membership, for friends, companions, you know, like a country club, okay? They're not there to do any harm, but at the same time, they're guilty in the sense of being naive to what they're a part of, okay? So I can't point the finger at them and say, you're all a bunch of evil scumbags. You're naive and you're guilty in that sense, and you're stupid that way. But that's not where the problem lies. Problem lies when you've been a member long enough and shown your loyalty and so forth, and you suddenly get tapped on the shoulder mysteriously by a member you've never seen before, okay? And then all of a sudden, you disappear from good from the lower ranks of the coffee clutch, because the reason you were tapped on the shoulder is because you were asked to join, and all of a sudden it's brought to your attention, oh wow, there's these upper levels I'm being invited to. And, you know, there's like, you know, the new smartphone syndrome, shiny new phone syndrome. Wow, I'm being invited into this upper echelon. This is cool. I'll get to meet more people. This is very much the same way that politicians in the good old days got away with it with the Ku Klux Klan, because they had to be part of the Ku Klux Klan to get anywhere, okay? And and that's exactly where they came from anyway, so it was the same parallel there. But when you start raising up through the ranks, it's a catch-22. You might not have known what you were walking into. You might have had, you know, just average benign intentions for going up the ladder, but you get to a certain point where, okay, now you know what's going on. Now you're a part of it, but now you're trapped because they've elevated you. It's the same bureaucratic mentality. If your boss is an idiot, they don't fire him, they promote him, okay? So this is the same thing, the same methods used here in reverse. You're not promoted, you're trapped by being elevated through the rank. And then now you're guilty of sin, because by association, now you're a part of it and you have no choice. So there's that aspect of it. There are those others, though, who are in it to the death and represent pure evil in the upper ranks. And you're talking about this upper ranks being 33rd degree Masons, okay? When I hear people talking in groups, black or white, who say, oh, I'm a 33rd degree Mason, I know this and that, I just laugh at them. I was like, if you're a 33rd degree Mason, you and I would not be having this conversation right now, because you're not allowed to even come near me, okay? You don't exist in broad daylight, okay? You don't exist in the general populace. You're not even allowed to open your mouth and say that under penalty of death, okay? So this is how I know who's BSing me and, you know, who's flaunting their ego. But you might be a 32nd degree Mason, but the difference between 32nd and 33rd degree is the difference between Homosapien man and a chimpanzee, okay? Big difference. only within a couple chromosomes, but big difference.
Yeah.
So, you know, that 1 degree means everything, because then once you get to that level, then you're indoctrinated and you end up coming face to face with the very thing that's been pulling your strings and pushing your buttons all along. And you will come face to face with the grays. You will come face to face with these reptilian entities. And of course, this is why someone like a John D. Rockefeller looked like the Walking Dead, like the life force had been sucked out of him. And when you line him up next to the picture of your traditional gray alien, they look exactly the same. He looks like one of them. The shape of his head, his eyes, his bony chin. It was like, I showed it to my dad one day, just didn't even tell him anything. I said, here's John D. Rockefeller. Here's a picture, and I put it next to one of my paintings of the grays. I said, what do you think? And he almost keeled over. He said, oh my God, they look like twins. I said, yeah, that's my point. So once you start getting up into the higher echelon of the unknown, okay, this is where it becomes a horrid situation. And this is a big problem, because if I tried walking into your average run-of-the-mill Masonic Lodge, they wouldn't have any knowledge of this. They wouldn't even know where I'm coming from, okay? They just wouldn't get it. They might know a few tidbits here and there, or table scraps that have been thrown to them to keep them loyal, but it's the same thing they would do to a female Mason or a black Mason. They're thrown table scraps to keep them loyal, so that they think they know something, but they don't. And that's how you keep a division in the ranks. This mentality of compartmentalized membership carried over to the military mentality, okay? US military, once again, is there a darker aspect to the US military? Yes, but it's not to be blamed on your average veteran who served in the legitimate military. It's not their fault. They don't know any better. But when you get into the upper echelon of the higher brass, now you're back to square one again with that Masonic allegiance to the grays. So once again, this is the problem. Your average low-level Mason, your average military veteran or military service member who's serving right now, they are not capable of understanding that, nor should it be rested at their doorstep. You know, they shouldn't be blamed for that. So that's something that needs to be put out there, because when I talk about this stuff in my book, or when I speak about it, you know, it can easily be misconstrued as, oh, Rick hates the US military. No, I don't. What I hate is the dark element behind it. So that is misguiding our troops and murdering our sons and daughters needlessly on the front lines, or worse yet, home here, indoctrinating and brainwashing these new members into Freemasonry, or new police force members into the police force. I mean, they're out there, they want to make a difference, they don't know any better. But once again, same thing again. Once you get indoctrinated into the higher ranks of law enforcement, you become the enemy to yourself. You become this jaded person that hates and despises everybody. And that's the difference there as well. Veteran cops versus newbies, okay? So the problem lies in the background with the system that was set up to support the upper echelon of all these institutions that are corrupt, have no intention of doing anything good for humanity, and are basically working towards the agenda of profit and greed all the time. So that's where that falls there. It's as far as its origins, as with anything else, it's all in the name. The very name Illuminati is not evil. It actually started out quite good and beneficial as a learning school, no different than the Christs, okay? No different than the Egyptian university system. Granted, it was started as an underground element, but you know, you didn't have a choice in the matter. When you're going up against the Pope and the Vatican, and you're doing it in the backyard of Rome, you're not exactly going to announce, hey, the Illuminati's here, we're going to teach you the real truth, okay? So that's you're starting with the way things were escalating from Socrates, and then Copernicus, and then right on through to Galileo. At that point, Galileo was like, okay, we got to do something about this. And he took the word from Copernicus, because a little known fact here nobody knows about, Copernicus followed in the footsteps of Socrates and actually took his students and his school of thought down to Egypt to get the answers they needed. Now that was forbidden. Now that's what put Copernicus on basically Europe's shit list at that point, because it was forbidden to go to Egypt at any point in time. That was just cut off, okay? So Copernicus is like, well, screw that, we're gonna go. And so that's why he came within 2 inches of, getting his head separated from his shoulders. But unfortunately in doing that, it backfired on them and turned Copernicus into this hero, that unexpected hero. And that worked against them. They didn't want to do that to Galileo, so they put him under house arrest. But the events leading up to that is what motivated Galileo to create this school of thought. And they took the term Illuminati from Copernicus, who got it from the Egyptian university system, the illuminated minds. Now, unfortunately, when everything went to hell at that point, and those original scientists, architects, artists, mathematicians, philosophers, when they were put on the hit list by the Vatican and various other high-ranking aristocrats in Europe to kill them on sight, they scattered. And in doing so, it created a broken chain of information that Galileo couldn't manage anymore under house arrest. So it got away from him and became this beast, this Frankenstein's monster that it was never meant to be. Because if you're on the lam and you're about to be put to death as soon as you're found, that does something to you psychologically and emotionally. And at that point, it's fight or flight. And so what happened was all these other disparaging elements that had an axe to grind against the upper management, they all started banding together under these broken ranks and splinter groups of the Illuminati. That created a very bad situation, but it was one that was planned, because that's what the church wanted, that's what the Greys wanted. They wanted that deranged element to enter in, very much like the Tea Party or the alt-right or the Ku Klux Klan, okay? They wanted that element to enter into politics, or in this case, the Illuminati, and destroy what was good about it and turn it into this abortion. And sure enough, they got the manufactured enemy they wanted. And at that point, it had gone so far out of control that the Illuminati just went down the tubes and became this disgusting element that was just out for, because of the psychological damage that had been done to them, now they were just out to protect themselves. Absolute power, absolute control, we're going to take over everything. And this is where this monster came from today. And of course, who are they going to target? They're going to target the most prolific group out there, which is the Masons. Okay, because that's the one that has the most reach, the most control. Okay, so they became master infiltrators and rose through the ranks and became all those 33rd degree Masons across the board. And this is why you end up having all these disparaging arguments over the founding fathers. Well, if the Illuminati is evil, what does that say about the founding fathers, who were all Masons? Okay, we can always argue that they were a bunch of scumbags for being slave owners. They were a bunch of scumbags for being real estate owners who had separate interests from the Revolutionary War, okay? But at the same time, it must be understood, I can't honestly say that someone like a George Washington or a Benjamin Franklin was pure evil in respect of the Illuminati, okay? They may have been influential Masonic members, but you're not talking about 33rd degree Masons, okay? They weren't that high. They were influential, but they weren't that high. So you can't really even rest it at their doorstep. There's plenty of other stuff you can pin on them, but not that, okay? So there is a difference.
Yeah, so there does seem to be this theme of infiltration.
Mm-hmm.
And that anytime there was something that was good, it got exploited somehow by some sort of rogue terrorist group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that makes me think back even as far as Egypt, because to the common person, Egypt, when they think of Egypt, they think of the Exodus story, how they were slaves, built the pyramids, which is complete nonsense, but that there was this huge rebellion and Exodus, and the Egyptians were evil, and that the monotheistic religions of, you know, the Abraham God, they were the good guys. So is Egypt, like, what's the real story with Egypt? I mean, obviously it was like a mystery school, right? There was a place of education. What's the good side of Egypt people need to know?
Yeah, there's actually a magnificent story about that, about behind it, that has been hidden from everyone on purpose. One of the most damning facts is that all the Christs, whether it's Abraham, Jesus, Muhammad, Noble Drew Ali, whoever, okay, they all had to go through Egypt to become a Christ. That was the indoctrination. Okay, they didn't just show up that way. They had the psychic capabilities. Maybe they were born with superpowers, who knows? But the point is, they had to be taught how to do it the right way. That was the responsibility of the Egyptian adepts or the Buddhist High Lamas, who worked in tandem with each other. Okay, there was no separation there. The Egyptian university system, which is referred to in occult terms as the Commission Mysteries, okay, or the mystery schools, that's what they were there for. They were there for the Christs, to teach them how to go out into the world and make it a better world. When they talk about someone like Jesus fasting for 40 days and 40 nights on the Mount, he wasn't doing that on the Mount. He wasn't sitting there by himself. What that really was, when you go back and look at the research, that was a Jewish temple that was part of the Egyptian university system that he was learning in for 40 days and 40 nights. So they camouflage it with the term fasting and that he was sitting on a mountain and all that. No, he was in a temple learning, and his master told him, if you want to finish your indoctrination as a true Christ, you have to go to the Giza Plateau and finish it out there, because that's where everybody goes. And why is that the case? This is where we get into solving the mystery of the Sphinx, okay? The Sphinx sits atop the Hall of Records. The front paws are extended out extremely far in an elongated manner for a reason, because that's a top entrance and exit, okay? The thing is this, it was designed for the Christs as the ultimate tests. If you are supposed to be a real Christ, you have to go there. The Egyptian adepts will be waiting for you because they can sense when you're coming, okay? They will take you and they will actually throw you into this dark, no light whatsoever, underground terrain. And they'll be like, have a nice day. If you're real, you won't die, okay? So they lock you down there, and you, using your psychic powers as a real Christ, have to find your way out. Well, the way out is to be sitting at the paws of the Sphinx. Now, that's the ultimate test. Every Christ has had to go through that. Abraham, Jesus, every one of them. And if they succeeded, the Egyptian adepts would give you some time. They would come back, and they would see the true Christ sitting there at the paws of the Sphinx, because they found the way out. Now, that's how you judge what a real Christ is, which kind of implies there's a whole lot of dead bodies down there somewhere. So for the wannabes who never were real. But that's how you clean the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. So that's another gauge to go by when you hear these people who say, oh, I'm a Messiah, I'm a Christ. I was like, okay, did you go to Egypt? Did you get tested by the Sphinx? And they'll look at you like you have 4 heads, and that's because they don't know what they're talking about. All right. Now, every one of them had to do that. Now, that's why Egypt was blacklisted and lambasted as pure evil, because if anyone found out this is where all the information is coming from and all the Christ energy, that would blow everything else out of the water. Okay. And most of that rhetoric came from the fact that the Egyptian university represented one institution of teaching, whereas Vatican City represented the opposing factor. And Vatican City didn't like the competition that was coming from the Egyptian university system. So this is when you have decrees put out by people like Emperor Justinian and Emperor Theodosius saying, no more of that. That's blacklisted. That's forbidden, the forbidden zone. Okay. You're not allowed to go anywhere under penalty of death. Otherwise, you will be labeled an enemy of the state, a threat, a traitor. Okay. So all these scare tactics were put out there to totally discourage anyone from going to North Africa at the time. A lot of this ends up becoming the rhetoric of calling it the Dark Continent instead of Mother Africa. You know, wonderful slant on that one. But that's where that's coming from. Now, even more so than that, why would the Christ go there? Why was the Egyptian university there? Okay. This is where we get into the origins of the spiritual insurrection, the Christ energy, the Christs themselves, versus the corporate titans, the Greys, the reptilian queens, okay? This is where it starts coming into sharp focus as a shocking reality as to how the two interplay with each other, and how one is not separate from the other. So here comes the origins of what I talk about as the atom and the gene for passion, self-awareness, okay? And what did that gene for passion turn into? In a nutshell, this spiritual construct became known as the Temple of Solomon. It's not real. There are some academics out there who love to argue with me and say, well, I found it. Great, I'm happy for you. No one cares, okay? It's not important where you think it might physically be, because in truth, whatever reality there is for that, the Temple of Herod was built on top of it as a smear tactic against the Temple of Solomon. So who cares where it really is? The point is, it's a spiritual paradigm. It's a global revolution, okay? And what happened was that the gene for passion that was handed off to us by our extraterrestrial benefactors to wake us up passed through the Temple of Solomon, and when it came out the other side, it became known as the Passion of the Christ, or the Kundalini, or the Orgone energy, okay? And this is where the term Passion of the Christ came from, the gene for passion. That's what started that revolution in that part of North Africa, that corner there where Egypt is now, and what used to be known as the Garden of Eden, the original laboratories, okay? And that's where the revolution started. Now that revolution, eventually evolved into what's known today as the Moorish Legacy, and that's where the Moorish Legacy came from. And so here's where the dividing line became, where the Masonic agenda was working for the Greys and the Moorish Legacy was working for the Christs.
And so where did you first come up with, or not come up, or just like discover the term or even the concept of the Moorish Legacy? Because it's like most, I mean, it's inherent within the way you tell the story that there's so much of a slant and of destruction of the knowledge of where we come from.
Yeah.
But it's like, obviously there was some, like, the place of Africa we didn't just like slowly evolve over time. There was something there that was really pretty. So how did you first discover that, or where did you find that?
This is the Moorish Legacy. To explain where it comes from, it should be understood that it's a real thing, but it's also a spiritual identity. So it has no boundaries on race, gender, color, okay? Yes, it's predominantly about the family of man, the people of color and hue, and for a good reason, which I talk about in the book, but the Masonic agenda is what turned it into a racist dichotomy, because they're all about the supremacy of corporatism and the pale skin and all that, and wiping out the family of man. But the Moorish Legacy is like, no, that's not what it's about. It's about humanity, okay? So where I come into it is about the year 2005, Okay. And I was up to that point from like early 90s, right on up to 2005. I was becoming more and more aggressive with the type of subject matter I was talking about in relation to the alien abduction phenomena. And I was right there almost. And I knew there was something I was missing. There was some key element that I knew was just gone. And most of that awareness came from the fact that ever since my first extraterrestrial awakening at the age of 21, I've been having these ongoing dialogues and conversations with an extraterrestrial being, among others, that I refer to as the crone, which is a female praying mantis type. Okay. She had been guiding me to these other mentors along the way. Well, one of those mentors just happened to be someone who became a good friend of mine, Peter Moon, who actually over the years has written the books on the Montauk Project, and now he's writing things about the mysteries of the Romanian mountains now, in Romania too, and the alien base that's embedded in the mountains there. So in 2005, I happened to be at a meeting at his house. He says to me, he says, hold on a minute. He says, I'm supposed to give you something. And I don't know how he came to that conclusion, whether he was sent a message or not, but he goes running back to his office where he has his whole library of books, comes out, and he's holding this giant fat book that's referred to as the biography of Noble Drew Ali, the exhuming of a nation. And he says, this is for you. He says, this is meant for you. He says, I think in time you realized that it was always yours in the first place. And that night I went home, and from that point on, from the summer of 2005 up to October of that year, 2005, I just read right through it and absorbed whole chunks of it there. And I started, and that's when I was like, holy cow. And this was the piece I was missing. And that's why he gave it to me, because he knew the stuff I was talking about, and he saw my frustration with the UFO community and the alien contact community, because I knew they were all missing out on something. They were going in the wrong direction, and they were all being overwhelmed with all these fantastical conspiracies that went in all sorts of weird directions and were unimportant and so forth. And it's like, you guys are losing your focus here. That's when he realized I was ready for that. And sure enough, that exploded everything as the missing piece to all this with the alien abduction phenomena and what was really going on. So that year, I think it was November of 2005, is when I first came out with, this whole thing about the Moorish Legacy, the Masonic agenda, extraterrestrial intervention, and the whole real estate aspect of it, of flesh and bone versus wood and stone. And which was actually a concept I had learned from one of my other mentors earlier on by the name of Brian Levins. And once I started putting these pieces together, it was like it created this understanding that no one had hit upon before. And I started looking around and realizing, you know what? No one in the UFO community is talking about the Native American perspective, or the Native African perspective, or the Asian or Arabian perspective. That's totally left out of the conversation, okay? And if all you're gonna do is be a weekend warrior on Saturday chasing after UFOs, only to end up going to church on Sunday, worshiping the same thing you were just chasing after on Saturday, and you're a dog chasing your tail, okay? And you're not getting anywhere. So this helped people break out of that vicious cycle and started seeing the bigger picture of what's happening with the entire human race.
Yeah, that's such a great question, like, to bring up, is just, well, what about the Native American or the indigenous African? Yeah. What about the indigenous perspective? Because that has been totally absent from this whole discussion. And it seems like it, I mean, obviously there's a way of following the breadcrumbs back to the original source, which you go through Egypt and even back beyond further than that. And you get the story of Enki and Enlil, and you get the whole, what was it? The iron hand of oppression versus the lamp of illumination, right?
Right, exactly.
It's like, it kind of comes back to those two schools of thought, which I'm in the like the Hopi tradition and a lot of South American traditions, they talk about the prophecy of the eagle and the condor.
Yeah, okay.
We had these two birds that were flying together at one point, but then something caused them to split, which arguably could have been this massive interplanetary devastating, like the word, even the word catastrophe or disaster has the word star in it. So
yeah.
A star coming to Earth or a planet exploding. I mean, now we have the asteroid belt, but there is the possibility very strongly that used to be a giant planet that was like, you know, maybe this conflict was going on in our solar system and the refugees ended up coming here. So, but there was like life on this planet going on as all of this was happening. And it's like a lost chapter of human civilization.
Yes.
Which
kind of maybe explains why these two birds symbolically split.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that too. In the you mentioned the asteroid belt. Just so happens to be, there's a chapter in the new book coming out in a couple weeks that I talk specifically about that. If you want to, I can bring it up here. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that.
Oh, I'd love to. I'm so interested.
Okay.
Great. I'm excited right now.
Okay. Once again, this ties several things together. Our linguistics, our mythology, things like that. But NASA will often say that the only reason we have life here is because we're in this perfect third orbit from a star. So they're under this misguided assumption that if they look at other solar systems, that's where they should look, only in that area. And that's wrong, because we have life in the past and coming back now on Venus and Earth and Mars, and some of the moons of Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus too, okay? So you have to redefine your scope of what life is. Is it a sentient crystal, or is it, you know, a humanoid being with legs and arms, okay? You know, there's different forms of intelligence there, and they come in different forms based on the environment they're in so that they can survive, all right? It's true on this planet too. I mean, my pale skin wouldn't survive 3 minutes in the deserts of Arabia. So, you know, that's why I don't belong there, okay? There's a reason why people along the equator are 7 shades darker. They need that melanin to stand up to the sun. But it's the same anywhere on any planet if you redefine life in the right way. So the idea that we belong in this third orbit, or it's just by chance that life showed up here, is completely absurd and off the wall. Because the truth of the matter is, behind the scenes, here we are again going back to the illegitimate black ops military, they've been using Earth, the Moon, and Mars in a leapfrog effect to get to the asteroid belt. Why? Because it's all about real estate, and by feudal law, we own the asteroid belt. It belongs to us by law, okay? Real estate law, and real estate law is universal. It doesn't matter what solar system you come from. It's not going to change. It's based on the system of feudalism. And so that's why, yeah, they're interested in the moon. Yeah, they're interested in Mars. But more so, these are leapfrogs to the asteroid belt to get the rich, valuable resources that are locked in those asteroids, okay? This is why we end up seeing footage coming back on YouTube of these mysterious reflective metallic objects on one of the largest aspects of the asteroids. It's like, where's that? Well, that's a military base so, underground in the asteroid, mining it, okay? And there's a bunch of engineers there mining it. So, but the relationship that's there, because we have these black ops programs going to Moon, Mars, and asteroid belt, is because we already know the relationship. And the relationship was that Mars used to be the 3rd planet. Earth used to be the 4th planet, but it wasn't called Earth. That's a later term. It was called things like Tiamat, older names like that, which of course means sister of mud, okay? Much larger planet at the time, obviously, with a much more rounder crust. I mean, the dead giveaway is if you take away the water, we look like a chewed apple core, okay?
Yeah.
That's all we look. That's not a planet. That's a big old fat asteroid that was able to hang on to an atmosphere, okay? So how did that happen? You know, because that's got to be one blood-curdling catastrophe that took place, okay? So when we were the fourth planet, and all this lunacy was going on with Prince Enlil and his father, King Anu, in a very paranoid way, trying to hang on to the solar system to make the queens happy. There was a very well-known, very prolific military leader that came along by the name of Lord Zeus, okay? And this was the guy that if you took all the famous military generals of our planet and put them together, that would be him. He was the supreme master and commander of all the military forces put together, military forces and martial arts. He was gifted in everything. This, of course, with his charisma, the average quote unquote citizen loved him, but upper management's looking at this guy like he's a threat, okay? So they took a keen interest in him for an altogether different reason. Now, it wasn't like this guy had any aspirations to take over anything. He was happy being a military commander of, you know, the Star Armada and the armed forces and all that, and the Air Force, so to speak. But they took it a different way, and they decided to put certain plans in action to not only keep him under control, but also eventually get rid of him, okay? Because that kind of popularity will threaten anyone in upper management, all right? So Lord Zeus was the person who actually would train a lot of the military members, including those in the Royal Guard known as the Anunnaki, okay? And here's where you have a civil war breaking out at that point, because word got back to Lord Zeus about all these shenanigans and clandestine plans that were going on, plotting to kill him. So, because Prince Enlil and King Anu had gone to the queens and said, look, and they presented this false, fake news story, okay? He's a threat to us. We got to get rid of him. He's going to take over. And queens were like, okay. And they had already given King Anu a special toy of their own, okay, known as the Planet Killer, all right? Now, this goes back to the Invisible College and comes out in things like George Lucas's Death Star, or Gene Roddenberry's Dyson Sphere, or things like that, okay? This is where all that mythology comes from in the movies, is from that cosmology. So this Planet Killer was this giant metallic sphere that had the power to destroy whole planets, and was fully armed. So Lord Zeus hatched a counter plan to go after the one thing that they prized the most and use it to not to take over anything, but to force them to back down, okay? Now, you can see how that's going to escalate. So, you know, keeping a long story short here, he, using his influence among the military and the Anunnaki Guard, he was able to create strife on the Planet Killer to the point where his forces, his Zeus loyalists, took over and got the Planet Killer under their control. Well, in the movie Contact, they have a famous phrase, you know, why build one when you can have two for twice the price? Only this one can be kept a secret. The one that the queens were keeping on the back burner was the secret second one, the other Planet Killer, okay? They went back in force. Once word got back to them that Lord Zeus had done this, Prince Enlil and King Anu spun it in a way that favored them. Look, he took it over. That was the toy you gave us. Now he's going to use it against you, okay? So the queens are now on the bandwagon, okay? They end up coming back in force with Enlil's whole armada plus the second Planet Killer, okay? Now, all hell breaks loose in the solar system as wars, you know, battles are breaking out everywhere. And Prince Enlil's Planet Killer faces off against Lord Zeus, okay? And they go at it, you know, like hell on wheels, beating the ever-loving crap at each other, you know, blasting away. Thing is, the queens always have a backup plan. And they knew that Lord Zeus was, Lord Zeus had a very good chance of winning, even though he was outnumbered. Okay, he was that kind of a military genius. They were terrified that he was going to take over. And so they weren't going to take any chances. Their operatives had actually built a kill switch into the planet killer. And this is why in Star Wars you see Luke Skywalker firing into the hole. That was the kill switch, okay? And so they send the word to set off the kill switch, and it shut the whole planet killer down. It made it lose control, okay? Now, mind you, it had already taken a beating. It was already damaged from battling Enlil's forces. Now it was completely out of control. Nobody could control it, okay? Now it's just drifting aimlessly, okay? And it's this big, giant metal sphere, okay? Well, more so than being a planet killer, this is how it was etched into the psychology of our mythology as a planet destroyer. Because at that point, King Anu and Prince Enlil didn't even know about the kill switch, okay? They didn't know about that. So now this thing is floating. Where is it floating towards? Right towards Tiamat, the planet they were battling over, okay? And they tried blasting the hell out of it as best as they could, but that couldn't stop it. It was increasing with velocity at that point. And it was just enough, like a small moon, to go colliding right into the planet and cause an extinction level event that blew it to smithereens, okay? Now that kind of horrific force was felt throughout the entire galactic community, okay? This goes back to in Star Wars when Ben Kenobi's like, I felt a disturbance in the Force when Alderaan was blown to, or whoever it was blown to smithereens, okay? Same thing. And what had happened was that because of the original orbit, the smaller pieces had formed the asteroid belt and stayed within that gravitational pull over and over. But the largest chunk, which had some weight behind it, floated into an artificial third orbit. Over time, at that time, the decision came down. It was such devastation, they let it froze over into a giant ice block to let it heal itself. And then as time went on, the planet came out of that hibernation period, which was eons, okay, and began to grow again, but it was still just a chunk of its former self. And this is what becomes known over time as Earth, in which case now Mars gets booted into the fourth orbit, okay, as the fourth planet. And this is why when you look at the solar system, there's no logic or reason to how the planets line up, because you have 4 small planets here right next to the sun, and then way the hell out here is all the big planets, and this giant fat space in between, of which the only thing you can account for is the asteroid belt, okay? So this is where all that comes from. This is, NASA knows this, the military knows this. No one's going to talk about it though, because our psychological identity is all based on this idea of, oh my God, we're so lucky we were born on the 3rd planet from the sun. No, you weren't, okay? So, no, okay? But that's, and now, linguistics. With this being such a devastating and catastrophic event, all centering around this heroic figure called Lord Zeus, okay? Nobody's quite sure what happened to Lord Zeus. Some of them feel he was captured by the Orion Empire and the Canis feudal lords, okay, and brought back brainwashed and, you know, turned into a poor shadow of himself. Others feel he got away somehow at the last minute before the thing exploded. No one's quite sure, but what did happen was that left such an indelible mark on the psychology of our primate ancestors, and what was handed down to us from our extraterrestrial teachers after Earth came out of its hibernation, okay, that Zeus became doubled in reference, in reverence for the name as Zuzu. And then Zuzu became mispronounced as Zeus. And this is where the god of Zeus came from, okay?
Oh my God, that makes so much sense.
Now, when you line up the two, Lord Zeus versus the god Zeus, they mirror each other perfectly, because Zeus was the most powerful god of all, the king of the gods. Well, that's a direct metaphor for master and commander, military commander of the Sky Armada, the Air Force, okay? And what is that represented by? Mount Olympus, the king of the gods who has the power of lightning to shoot lightning from his hands. That's a reference to the Air Force, to be able to shoot from anywhere in the sky at any moment and take out your enemy. Okay?
Yeah, and Zeus waged a war against the Titans.
Yeah.
Took over Mount Olympus. So yeah,
right.
That's all in there.
Exactly. And the Titans are, the defects. So, but the ones who are power hungry all the time and always have, not such good intentions there. Also, too, the whole idea of Zeus being the god of thunder, or the king of the gods with the power of lightning, I should say, that's a direct reference to Lord Zeus taking over the planet killer, the Death Star. Because what did the Death Star do? It showed up anywhere in the sky, it shot a laser, aka lightning, to the planet and destroyed the planet. So there's also that double reference as well.
Now here's my question. Is our moon one of these Death Stars over many, many eons, just completely weathered away, and after asteroids hitting and everything, and it just kind of looks like this big crater type of thing? Is our moon one of these Death Stars, do you think?
I can say the moon is definitely artificial. I think there's a lot of people on board with that knowledge now these days, because it's always stationary. We only see one side of it. The only time we see the other side is when it's in an eclipse, okay? In which case, military forces will shut all the lights down on the bases so you don't see anything on the dark side. Yeah, but no, it's definitely a hollow metallic structure that's been covered over and crusted over by other impacts from asteroids and comets and so forth. There are some who feel that it is a relic of what was left behind as Enlil's planet killer, the second one.
Right.
So, and yeah, there are others who will say that because it's artificial, it's a metallic sphere, that it doesn't belong to us in the first place. And I mean, we're stuck with it because of the tides and the seasons. But if we ever took it away, it would be devastating to some extent. But it's weird to think that we're all hinged on this artificial metallic orb. And some others will say that it came from the outermost regions of the solar system, the kingdom, way out beyond Pluto, and was dragged in by this other planet, which gets back into the cosmology of King Anu and Prince Enlil and Enki and all that. What they some refer to as Planet 10, others refer to as Nibiru, and that somehow that dragged in these other artificial moons with it, one of which stayed behind. So no matter how you slice it, it's all part of the same cosmology. It just depends on how you want to look at it. But yeah, I do think it's a relic from that conflict.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And ironically, people are wandering around debating or questioning whether we're alone in the universe, and we look up and like the classic line from Star Wars, that's no moon, it's a space station.
Yes.
It's a smoking gun. It's constantly there, always representative of just like we're looking it right in the face, and it's just like we're not even aware.
I know. I look back at the original Star Wars movie now with a totally new set of eyes, and everything they say in that movie, I'm like, oh my God, I never picked up on it as a kid. So.
It's incredible. It's incredible the synchronicities that are in all of that. With that, when I was looking into a lot of the Anunnaki stuff in the beginning of my research and everything, and learning about the first book I read about that discovered Enki and Enlil and that whole narrative was the book Gods of Eden by William Bramley. And they mention it's like different than the Zechariah Sitchin narrative, which he actually criticizes a lot in this book because it's very much from the Judean kind of like from the slave perspective as opposed to from the more of an objective point. And he wrote it as a Gods of Eden as a way to like, I want to find out where the origin of war is. And this is a guy that really didn't believe in extraterrestrials or anything like that. And every time he would go on a paper trail of research, it would always end up back in the same place where these extraterrestrials would show up and there's intervention. And he's like, well, I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere in my research. Let me go back, start again. But he did this a number of times for many years. Always ended up back at the Enki and Enlill story and that whole thing. So that's what he ended up writing the book about, because he didn't want to just, he couldn't ignore it at that point. But that was the first time I heard about the whole story of Marduk.
Okay.
And so I like the way you describe Marduk as being kind of this guy that was manipulated because he was easily to kind of inflate his ego to wage a war. But with the whole story of Marduk and Tiamat, there's like a tradition, like Marduk was supposedly the one that was trying to defeat Tiamat in this whole thing. And the way I saw it when I was first researching this was like there were some connections with Zeus and Marduk, because before Zeus took over in the traditional Greek mythology, Mount Olympus, and defeated the Titans, he had his brothers Poseidon and Hades, right? And Poseidon had Trident, who was always my personal favorite Greek man, which makes sense because like he very much is Enki in that story. And the stories or the versions I've heard about this narrative with Marduk getting his ego inflated to like wage a war and take on his father Enki's fight against Enlil. I always looked at Marduk almost as like a Darth Vader kind of archetype, where like Anakin Skywalker, he's trying to stop the Empire from forming and everything, but he ends up becoming the very thing fighting in the first place. So Marduk almost like reminds me of that, because like I'll defeat Tiamat in the story, and it's like, yeah, okay, if you defeat Tiamat, yeah, sure, you could be king of the earth, but like there's no chance of that happening. And then sure enough, in the story he ends up doing it, and then suddenly you've got this idiot like in charge of the whole corporate structure of the Anunnaki and everything, and it's like, all right, well, what the hell's going to happen now? That story seemed to have gotten like over time the mythology and the stories from the Sumerian, Babylonian versions, and then it gets like the continuation of that story in the Greek mythology, where Zeus like rises up and becomes the king of Mount Olympus, where his father Enki was technically like the one that was more higher up in that structure, but then suddenly Poseidon is like put off as the lesser god Poseidon. Zeus is now in charge.
Right.
So it's like, and I always looked at that, it was just like, wow, well, Zeus was kind of a dick. But but the way that you tell the story, I think that's like, obviously, there's so many layers and ways to approach the subject, and you can kind of get a whole new perspective as you go along. But this whole, I never heard about or even thought about it from that perspective of Lord Zeus, right? Really, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. And with what you're saying there, then of course, who would the Titans be? They would be the Canis feudal lords he was fighting against, and the Canis feudal lords were a bunch of miscreants anyway. They would sell their mother into slavery for a profit. So, it wasn't like they had any morals about this.
Right. Well, then that's like where Enki comes in. And that was one of the, like once I started learning, I actually have a tattoo of Enki on my arm.
Oh, okay, cool. Nice. I like it.
Yeah, Enki, like learning about that whole story, that was one of the biggest mind-blowing experiences. Like realizing that the good guy was the bad guy and the bad guy was the good guy in terms of the whole biblical narrative.
Do you remember when I talked about like where his name came from, Enki?
Yes, and the Ankyls. Yes, I think that also. I was curious. Also, have you ever heard of Corey Goode? Do you know who Corey Goode is?
I know the name. I haven't had much of a chance to follow him, but I am familiar with the name. Yeah.
He's supposedly an insider whistleblower upon this whole secret space program, where they're basically going out mining the asteroid belt, mining these planets. That there's an entire infrastructure of like secret space program going on, and he according to his story, whether it's true or not, talks about how he was involved in that and went out on these space missions and everything like that. But one of his main topics of discussion, in fact, his website's called Blue Avians, or the Sphere Being Alliance. He talks about these avionic bird-like beings.
Oh, okay.
These like 6-dimensional, like super evolved, like exactly what you describe as the Ankyls to be. And that they were fundamental in Egypt and helping evolve the human race, and they've come in at various times to help wake people up.
Right.
So it sounds like there's there's definitely a similarity there. And so like the Ankyls, how did you first discover the Ankyls? Like where did that come into your research?
That came up in extraterrestrial conversations, let's put it that way. But you'll also, to go back in time now, if you look at the Robert Morning Sky cosmology from the Hopis, you'll find the solid foundation in there too. Okay, it's in there as a big part of it, and you'll see that race of beings coming out there in a big way, and having that relationship with Prince Ea or Enki and his sister, Princess Ninhursag. So, but that's where you'll see that coming in there. What's interesting too is that with the Invisible College, you see that coming out in The Abyss with James Cameron, because people sometimes, regardless of how I describe the Ankyls, they'll still ask me, what do they look like? And I just tell them, go watch the movie The Abyss. That's a clear-cut, prime example as to what they look like. So, because being in that higher dimension, they partially kept themselves in the third dimension just to, keep the pulse of what was going on here. And that's a great metaphoric and symbolic way of describing a being that's transparent. They're there, but they're not there. You can touch them, but they're invisible. You can look right through them. So, just the way those beings looked in the abyss, where it was dead on with their avionic look and the wings they had on the back there that made them look angelic, So,
you see just when we think of ancient beings, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you see this overlapping into the movie with Nicolas Cage called Knowing, where at the end there, those beings come down in what's a clear depiction of what might have been Ezekiel's wheel in that kind of a spaceship. And what comes down from them is very similar beings to the abyss. These angelic-looking Ankyls come down. And all the same characteristics, the same looks. So I found it interesting that they brought that up again in the movie Knowing. So
yeah, that is very interesting, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's almost it seems like a lot of people would say that a lot of these movies in the Invisible College on YouTube now, you watch videos and it's just they're all just satanic propaganda.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there is symbolism in there, but it's almost like, again, there's these factions that are competing for how to direct the narrative in some of these stories. Like sometimes they're very clear cut, like the original James Cameron way of just like the Terminators and the New World Order, they're trying to kill us, to Avatar, where it's, tells the same story, but from a different perspective.
Right.
And then sometimes movies can be a little bit ambiguous on whether or not, like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this.
Yeah.
The best example of this would be, in my opinion, is movie Limitless. Have you seen Limitless?
Oh, is that the one? Is that the one where he takes the pill to gain the intelligence? Yes, that was an excellent story. I loved it.
I love that too, and I did a video on my Synchrocosm channel, which I'm curious. I really would love to check these out. But the Hollywood seems to release movies in pairs, like same year Deep Impact and Armageddon come out. The same year.
Yeah.
They always have these pairs. But then in the same year, the movie Limitless came out, which is of course about a man who takes a pill, activates his brain, makes him intelligent, and then the ensuing story. And then the same year, the movie Lucy came out. Have you seen that?
Oh, yes.
Very similar narrative, except this point from a female perspective. But the drugs inside of her system, it activates her brain.
Yes.
Freeman presiding over everything is like a kind of like a God resonator in that way.
Yeah, that was phenomenal what they did with that movie. Yeah.
Yeah. But with Limitless, it was for me that I personally, I love them both. But Limitless was a little bit ambiguous to me because in terms of the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes, yes.
And like the thing is with the pharmaceutical industry, they depend on you having to rely on them, kind of like the priests and the Pope. Like if you want to have health and wellness and spirituality and all that, you got to go through him, the middleman.
Yeah,
Like
right,
the
right.
pharmaceutical industry is like that in the scientific world or in the technology world. If you want to be healthy, you can't do it on your own. You have to take this pill. Or if you want to be smart, you got to take this pill. And at the very end of the movie, it was like a little ambiguous whether or not he was still on it or not. And I was just like,
Yes.
I really love the whole message, but at the end, I'm thinking, was this just a big commercial for like pharmaceutical industry on some way?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I picked up on that in there too. It was cleverly worked in there. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and it's another, funny connection with that is there's when my uncle does lectures and talks about the power of perception and the placebo effect, and he likes to use the analogy of taking the red pill. So
yeah.
he'll explain how first he'll go on this whole thing about the pharmaceutical industry and how you don't need to take these pills to heal. You can heal with your own perception through epigenetics, and you have this innate ability with your immune system. We just got to take control over our lives, like going from consumer slave to master investor on a biological level.
Yeah.
But he goes on this whole thing about you don't need the pharmaceutical industry. You don't need to take the pills. But there's this great movie called The Matrix.
Yes.
If offers two pills, you should take the red pill. And it's like, I get where he's coming from. Like, I always make fun of him for this. Because I'm like, Uncle Bruce, you're talking about how we don't need the pills, but then you immediately say, take the red pill. Like, which is it? Like, is it this pill or that pill? So, but it's like, I get where he's coming from, that there's the symbolic nature of the choice in taking the red pill, waking up, all that. But yeah, it's just kind of funny how just another example of how interwoven and layered our language is, to the point where we'll be saying one thing and it means so many other things.
Yeah. I know. And it kind of goes back to what you said before when you're watching these YouTube videos and it's all this conspiracy, satanic stuff and all that. They're going on a different slant on that. Conversations I've had with Linda, I tell her at times, I said, these people don't seem to understand how stupid they sound, because they never bothered to look into linguistically how this word Satan ever came into existence. And if they looked into that, they'd realize that it has no power behind it. It has no identity. It doesn't mean anything. It has no foundation whatsoever. It's an inflated term that became used as a propaganda tool over time. And, it's not, real honestly, there is no linguistic connection or etymological connection between the word Lucifer and the word Satan. They have nothing to do with each other. All right. Now, the word Lucifer, on the other hand, that has power behind it. It is the cipher of light. Okay. And that was Enki. He was the cipher of light. And this is how the word, Lucifer, becomes misconstrued and brought into existence, because in the end of it all, his brother creates this devil. His brother creates this devil in Enki, and through the term diabol, and that's how the word devil comes out. It's a reference to Enki. But the strange part is, if the devil's bad, isn't that the guy who created us? So how is he bad? All right. And this is how institutions like the church got away with labeling the human being as a dirty creature that is sinful. Okay. Because they went back and looked at that and misinterpreted it as like, oh my God, it was the power of the devil that brought man into existence. No, idiot. Okay. The enemy is the moron who sat himself on the throne and called himself God. That's the enemy. Okay. And it doesn't mean you're supposed to be, oh my God, Satan's the good guy, Lucifer. No, because those are just misconstrued terms. You got to get rid of those terms. Okay. I actually do talk about the two singular origins of the word Satan in the new book coming out. It is the one and only word out there that has two origins, and they both end up meeting in the middle. And it's bizarre. When you look into it, it's like, two linguistic origins, one having nothing to do with the other, and yet they both end up colliding together. So it's a very strange word as to its cosmological origin and its political origin, two very different things.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, it's been used the wrong way. It doesn't have any value. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, and so, you know, if people would educate themselves on where these extraterrestrial terms were coming from, okay, even something as simple as dog and cat, these are extraterrestrial terms. The word shadow is an extraterrestrial term, okay? Angel, devil, demon, okay? The monster, okay? These are all extraterrestrial terms that were brought down through time. And that off-world terms, okay, that ended up leaking their way into Webster's dictionary over time. So, but yeah, once you start deciphering the words and breaking them down, you become very empowered and realize how you're being controlled and manipulated by the propaganda of words.
Yeah,
so,
that is the original propaganda. And there's even that story of the Tower of Babel, where it was,
yes,
you know, and I guess it could be interpreted a few different ways of like who was actually confusing the language. Was it like Enlil, or was it Enki, or was it? I heard that you know, originally I think it was Enki that confused the languages, but from what I heard was that it wasn't. That was a slanderous way of looking at it. Was that Enlil had the one universal language that he can communicate people with.
mm,
Enki basically helped form a new language that was like a codified language, so that only his people, like they could basically communicate freely without like getting any red flags popping up to Enlil's forces.
yeah, I could see that. Yes, that would be run parallel to taking them to the secret caves and using that line of communication to mass educate the primates fast, like a speeded up form of education. Yeah.
Yeah, and then again, another element of the multi-layered way of interpreting it, it could be the other way around, where it's like at one point we all used to speak one language. We all used to be in the language of vibration, and and when this event happened, it fractured us and we separated, and everybody kind of started having to make up what they said.
Yeah. Right.
So there's that other side of it too. So it's like, what? It's like, okay, it's not as black and white, or as like, oh, you got the angel on this side, the devil on this side, because those two are constantly switching back and forth.
Right. And you could even look at the Tower of Babel as like this master tuning fork or rocket ship, you know, whatever way you want to go with that. And once that tuning fork was destroyed, that vibration of intention, telepathic power of communication, like you said, was broken. So yeah, you know, it's almost like a deaf person who suddenly gains hearing, and now they're trying to use their voice to formulate words that were normally locked in their head, you know, with sign language. It's a totally different experience. So it's understandable how, you know, the verbalization became perverted, and because everybody was trying to verbalize what was locked in their head, you know, and it wasn't coming out the right way.
Yeah. So I don't want to keep too much of your time. I just want to say, first of all, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
I really love this, and I mean, I would like to post this on my YouTube channel, and you guys can, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, definitely. Make sure you send us the link, and we'll, you know, shoot it around and promote it. Okay.
Absolutely, great. And with that in mind, promoting it. So you say you got a new book, a new record dropping here soon.
Yes. It's going to be The More, the Mason, and the Alien Part 2 of Real Manifesto. So it gets into, like, the first book, I got into a lot about the Moorish Legacy Masonic agenda. Now, using that as a foundation for Part 2, we get into the female aspect of it, female principle, the feminine goddess energy, and how that is got a painted target on it by the Greys and the reptilian queens and all that, and why is that being wiped out? Okay, why is that being targeted throughout history? And so it gets into that civil human rights struggle, and I bring it right up to present time, right on up to the World Trade Center disaster, okay, and why that took place, okay, in a kind of like a feud between upper management and middle management at that point, with the World Trade Center being the Western center of power for the Illuminati and the Western political arm for the World Trade Organization. So if you were looking to send a message to upper management, bombing the World Trade Center would be the way to do it. So,
Wow.
but you know, once you got their attention, now you're dead in the water, okay? Because then they're going to come after you. But no, it all leads up to that. Things like, what was the significance of the Oklahoma City bombing? What was the significance of the Tulsa City massacre? You know, all these things that evolved over time as a war against the human being, okay, the family of man, and how it escalated out of control, right on up to the beginning of, symbolically, the beginning of the 21st century that we're in right now, where a very, very paranoid lunatic fringe that became middle management ended up deciding to follow in the footsteps of the Nazi Party and take a strike against upper management, which was the biggest mistake they ever made. Because that created, they bit off more than they could chew.
That's the neocons you're referring to, like the Bushes and the
yeah,
guys.
and you know, how did things evolve from when the Ku Klux Klan took off their robes, put on a suit, started running for office? They become the neocons. The neocons become the Tea Party. The Tea Party becomes the alt-right. And it's just this evolution, this regurgitated garbage. Here we are looking at across the sea at, oh, look, the Mujahideen became Al-Qaeda, which then became ISIS. And like, wait a minute. We have the same problem in our own backyard. We have this evolution of lunacy that is riding shotgun over our democracy right now. So the focus of the book is America is the line in the sand, and this is where it's got to stop. Okay.
Yeah. This is they always say it's like America is the sleeping giant. If Americans only knew all of if we knew what was really going on here, then wow, then like that would be the end of the situation altogether. And I remember I went to Australia in 2013, and I was talking with somebody about the whole New World Order and the conspiracies and all that stuff. And in Australia, they have the whole thing where the government could, confiscated all of the weapons. And I was just bringing up at times like, oh, we got the whole gun control issue, and there's the debate of whether we should have them, we shouldn't, how do we regulate it? And he just brought up an interesting point. He's like, yeah, well, you know, the real reason the whole New World Order has not been fully actualized in their wildest dreams of what they want it to be is because the American people are so armed to the teeth that if they ever tried to revolt, it would just be like absolute madness.
That I can see that being the case. Yeah, I can see that.
But not as like a point like in one side or the other in that debate, because obviously there's a lot of issues with surrounding all that anyway. But yeah, it's like America is kind of like it's like the movie Poltergeist. It's like this whole place has been built on this ancient Native American burial.
Right.
And, we're being haunted in like poltergeist style. Like, what the hell is going on? If we only knew in the first place what this place actually represented and Native man and the indigenous cultures and their stories, it's like, then it's like, wow, talk about waking up. And that'd be a great starting point if Americans were to truly wake up, is to like look at the atrocity that we committed against Native Americans and just like, let's start asking, what about the Native Americans? I mean, because if anything unites us as Americans, it should be our homage to that.
Yes.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you want, in this interview, you might as well get the word out there. Linda and I are hosting the first ever Human Origins Conference in October. Oh, okay, go ahead. Tell him.
No, I was going to say, he only lives in California. He should come to the conference.
Yes.
Where are you guys live?
Rio Rancho, New Mexico. New Mexico.
I used to live in Crestone, Colorado. Are you familiar with that area?
Crestone, Colorado. Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Great Sand Dunes National Park is?
Yes. I know where you're talking about. Yes.
Right next to that, home of the ant.
It's actually, that's only maybe a couple miles away from the UFO watchtower there.
Yeah, no,
So,
I used to
yeah.
drive by it every day. I used to
Okay.
right there, yeah. But
Nice.
yeah, no, I would love to. So it's in October?
October 12th and 13th. And that's the ad, the advertising thing ad you'll see all around. The website, go visit the website. It's humanorigins.conference.com.
Yes,
Okay.
I check that out. And for everybody,
And
check that out.
Linda, I'll give them our website.
UFOteacher.com.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
great.
visit ufoteacher.com. Yeah. But and we would tickets are on sale right now. We have an early bird special going on till Labor Day. So
Great. I will totally look into that because I definitely need to come to. I mean, this has always been a fascinating subject to me. It was like out of nowhere. When I was a senior in high school, I just started like thinking about Atlantis constantly, like look up Atlantis. And I was like, what is
Yeah.
that? I'm looking up Atlantis. And I've had an interesting line of synchronicity guiding me to all this stuff. So I think a discussion on human origins would be great.
Oh, okay. we have a great lineup of speakers, and we have George Haas, who has been on Ancient Aliens, okay, and also George Norrie's program as well.
Beyond Belief.
Beyond Belief. We have Sonia Barrett, who is a film producer and documentarian, who comes from the perspective of the human condition and health issues, and people making profit off of disease. And
Ken Johnston.
we have Ken Johnston, who is the NASA whistleblower on the monuments and structures on the moon, and he's got the photographs to back it up. If you can believe that, I've seen them. They're fantastic. I can't wait for him to present it to the public. But and we have Norris Branham, who he runs his own entertainment company, and he's actually the media director for the conference, but he's also speaking on issues concerning the Iroquois and Native Americans, and how in a lot of cases people who are called African Americans are not African Americans, they're Native Americans. So, and they were labeled the wrong way early on.
Just because of their black skin.
Right.
Yeah.
We do have, since we were talking about the Anunnaki today, we have Karen Christine Patrick, who really gets into all of that ancient history. We have Brett Colin Shepard, who talks about also kind of like these, within our solar system, things that are imprinted over the eons onto the landscape of the moon or Mars in a phenomenal way that ends up kind of reinforcing our mythology and our symbolism in the solar system. And the stuff he talks about in his slide presentation is really quite remarkable and original. So we're lucky to have him.
And then Rick.
Oh yeah, that's me. Sorry.
Oh, great. Yes.
He's gonna be doing an updated version of the Temple University speech that you saw.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yes, I would love that. Do you have anybody filming it yet?
Probably. We were gonna think, hopefully, our media director, Norris.
Yeah. He's
but you're more than welcome to do it too if you come.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. I mean, and I was mentioning to you earlier, Rick, I mean, if there's anything I can do to help you put more content online, if you like want to
okay.
video, because you guys obviously have a media director, and that's great. But if there's anything I can do to help, like produce more content for you or anything like that, it'd be my honor.
And if you'd like to participate in the conference in that respect, that would be awesome too. We'd appreciate it in a big way.
Yeah, and either way, I plan on being there, so that would be
okay. Good, excellent. So yeah, no, we would love to see you there, and your uncle too, Dr. Lipton too. We'd love to have him there.
Yeah.
But in fact, yeah, it's been good talking with you though. Thank you for having us on the show here on the podcast.
Well, that means a lot. I thank you so much, both of you guys, Rick, Linda, for coming on. And again, for everyone listening, you can go to ufoteacher.com, right?
Yes.
ufoteacher.com to check out more information on Rick and Linda, and books and artwork and all sorts of really cool stuff. Definitely check out more stuff, because this guy here, Rick, is, I think, the best way of telling this story. The most really the best way of telling the story, because a lot of academic type people will just be like very like, you know, fact by fact by fact, and you've got the facts, but you really bring in the feel, because like you mentioned that lecture, it's like a lot of this stuff is like a soap opera on steroids. You know, and it's like, it needs to be told in that way, because it's like when we talk about it in just a very like cold way, we lose a lot of the feeling, and why it's like everything that's going on Earth right now connects to all of it, and we need to be able to relate to it, and you do a fantastic job, sir, of helping people relate to it.
Thank you. And it's been a pleasure talking with you as well. Please stay in touch with us. Don't lose touch with us, okay?
Oh, I will. We will definitely be in touch. Thank you so much.
Okay.
You said your YouTube channel was?
It's called The Synchrocosm.
Is that you?
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. That one right there was the most recent video that I edited of Hugh Jackman and the Tree of Life.
I saw that. Yeah, that movie. I love that movie. Yes.
The Fountain is one of I think it's my second favorite movie of all time. But there are so many synchronicities with Hugh Jackman's films, like with The Prestige and Logan.
Yes.
Fountain. If you watch this video, you'll definitely check it out. And then in terms of The Greatest Showman, in a way, he's almost like an Enki resonator in terms of like the depth, the genetic resonation of humankind and everything. So definitely check that out. There's a great one I did on Leonardo DiCaprio and the story of riches. So like Titanic, he's the rich guy who dies in the water. He seems to be constantly going into water in slow motion, like in
yes.
And then it accumulates with like what's the movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, where he's like super rich, and he's like, I've been rich and I've been poor, but I choose rich every fucking time.
Yeah.
It's like,
I remember seeing that. He played that role so well. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I subscribed.
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah,
So
check him out. I hope you like it. And let's definitely stay in touch. I would love to talk more with you about Native American culture. I work very closely with the Cree Plains Indians up in Canada.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Stuff like that. So if you're interested, I'm sure we can bring you guys along, and there's constantly like Sundance ceremony and sweat lodges.
Oh, good. Okay.
So if you're interested.
Yeah, we would love to hear about those. Sure, definitely.
Yeah. So absolutely. So guys, thanks again so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.